So I'm back in Visual Studio Code, and it's time to start working on our authentication microservice. And this will take a while, but it's not that difficult. So the first thing I want to do is to create a folder right beside broker service and front end, and then add it to my workspace. So I'll go back to my Finder or my desktop or wherever I have my information stored. And I'm looking at the folder that holds the broker service and the front end, and I'll create a new folder here, and I'll call mine Authentication-service. And I suggest you do as well, because it'll make working with the makefile and the Docker files much easier if we have the same naming convention. So that's there. Let's go back to Visual Studio Code and choose Add Folder to Workspace. And then I'll find Go Micro, which is right here. Choose Authentication Service and add that. Okay? So there it is. Now I'll open a terminal window. And I'll go up one level and into the authentication service and clear the screen and type go mod init. And I'm just going to call mine authentication. Okay. So I have a new go mod file. Perfect. So let's close that. And inside the authentication service, I'll create a new folder called CMD. And then I'll create another folder inside of that called API. And inside of the API folder, I'll create a new file called main.go. And of course, this is in package main. And it has a main function, so func main. And we'll leave it empty for the moment. Now, this is going to be a web service, but it's an API service. And of course, we need to listen on a specific port. And just to make things clean, up here at the top, I'm going to declare a constant, which I'll call web port. And I'll make that equal to the string of 80. We're going to listen on port 80. And we can do that, of course, even though the broker is listening on port 80, because Docker lets multiple containers listen on the same port and treats them as individual servers. And I'm also going to want an application config. So I'll create a type here called config, and it will be a struct. And it will have just a couple of fields. So the first one I'm going to want, of course, is we will be connecting to a database. So I'll create a field called db of type pointer2, right from the standard library, sql.db. Okay, and that did the import for me, so that's good. And I'm also going to have data models. Now in our case, to keep things really simple, we're going to have one table in the database called user, but we might add later more tables later on, so we may as well have a models type. And that will be of a type that doesn't exist yet, called data.models. Okay, and we'll create that in a minute, so don't worry about it. So let's create in our authentication service a new folder, which I'll call data. And inside of that, I'll create a folder called, or a file called, new file, models.go. Now, this is not a course in how to create data models for Postgres and so forth. So to save some time, if you go to the course resources for this lecture, you'll find a file called models.go.zip. Download that, extract it, and copy the contents of that file to this models.go file. And I'll just paste it in here because I have it on my clipboard already, and we'll go through it pretty quickly. It's pretty simple. So at the very top of this, we have package data, which is to be expected because it's in a folder called data. And then I import the things that I need to use. And as you can see, bcrypt needs to be imported, but it will be the first time I run this, so I'm not too concerned about that. And I declare one constant, db timeout. When I'm doing a database operation, how long should I go before it's considered to be a failed operation? And I set that to 3 seconds, which is pretty straightforward. Then I have a package level variable called db. Then, that's of type pointer2 sql.db. So that's where our database pool for connections to Postgres will live. And we'll get to connecting to Postgres before too long, so don't worry about that. The new function, this is a function that's used to create an instance of the data package. And it returns the type model, which we're going to use in our config. And that model type embeds all the types we want to be available to our application. Now in our case, it's just the user. That's the only one that we have. But if we add more models, more tables in other words, in the database, we'd add it to this new function right here, and we'd also add it to this models struct down here. And that way, it's really easy to get access to the models. Then I define a type for the database called user, And I give the JSON tags for all of these things as well. And it's dead simple. Email, first name, ID, last name, password, whether or not the user is active, and the standard created at and updated at timestamps. Okay? Then I have just the database functions, which are dead simple. So get all gets a slice of all users. Okay? Get by email allows me to get one user by email. And there's this SQL query right there. Very straightforward. Get one gets a user by ID. Almost the same as the one above, but I'm getting a user by ID instead of email. And then we have update that allows us to update the user's information. And delete gets rid of a user. And delete by ID gets rid of a user by ID. And the only reason I have this is this delete function, gets the ID of the user from the user receiver, the receiver that's a pointer to the model type user. And this one allows me just to specify the ID as a parameter. But they do exactly the same thing. Insert puts a new user into the database. Reset password is the function used to reset or change a user's password. And this is the one we're really interested in here, password matches. This allows us to determine whether or not the supplied information, a username and a password, or an email and a password, actually matches the email that we have in the database and the password hash that we have in the database. So that's pretty straightforward. Now, if I go back over to main.go, now that I have this data models here, I can actually make this do the import for me, hopefully, data.models. There, and it did the import. So now that we have our constant and we have our config set up, let's start working on our main function, okay? So what are we going to want to do here? Well, first of all, I'll just print some information out to the console. Log.println. And I'll just print out starting authentication service, just so we have some feedback, okay? Now, I'm obviously going to have some routes that I need to connect to, some things that will allow me to do specific things with this API. So we'll want to be able to, for example, in this section, to authenticate. Now, the easiest way to do that is to use the same approach we used with the broker service, and that's to create a routes.go. So let's go to the CMD API folder and create a new file called routes.go. And again, this will be in package main. And we'll have a function with a receiver of app pointer to config, that type we just set up a moment ago, and the function's called routes, just like the last time we did this. And it returns an http.handler right there. Now, I'm going to use the same routing package I did last time around. So let's open our terminal window. Make sure you're in the authentication service folder and type go get github.com /go-chi. We may as well be consistent. /chi/v5. We'll get that. And then we'll add /middleware to the end of that. And then we'll back up right to the /chi part and add cores. Nope, got that one wrong. Let's try that again. Go chi /cores. Try that again. That's better. Okay, so we've done our imports. That means we can use our imports up here in the routes function. So we'll create a variable mux and assign it the type of chi.newRouter. And make sure you get the one for version 5 right there. I have the old version installed as well. And now we want to allow to take care of cross-origin request forgery. So just to save some time, I'll go over to the broker service and open its CMD API routes, and I'll copy this because it's exactly what I want. So I copy that from the broker service, go back here and paste it in, and now we'll just say return mux. We'll worry about setting up the routes before too long, okay? We just want to get started here. So now that I have this routes function available to me, I can go back to main.go, and let's just write some comments. So to do connect to database. I'm going to do that before too long. Set up config. We can do that right now. We can say app is assigned the value of config, and just leave it empty for the moment. But we have that app variable. And now we want to set up a web server, SRV, just like we did before, is assign the value of a reference to http.server. Right there. And we'll give it an address, and we'll make that format.sprintf, and the string is $%s, and our substitution is that constant web port. And we also want to have the handler type, and that will just be app.routes. So that's set up. Now we can say, start the web server. Error is assigned the value of serve.listenAndServe. And we'll check for an error. If error is not equal to nil, then we'll just say log.panic. Because if we can't start the web server, something's gone wrong, and print out the error. Okay, so there is a bare bones version of our application, of our authentication service. So in the next lecture, we'll take care of connecting to the database. Let's move on.